Welcome to Family Drama Stories from Reddit. Real family drama told from the heart. Let's begin. My mother's voice shook over the line. We have nowhere else to go, Melissa. For a second, I almost forgot she hadn't called me in over 20 years. Suddenly, the woman who once left me behind was begging to sleep under my roof. But I wasn't that little girl anymore, lost and waiting for her mother to come back. This time, I held the power, and I had no intention of giving it away. When I was 8 years old, my mother remarried a man named Calvin. He had a firm handshake and a preacher's voice, always speaking in absolutes. My mother, once warm and full of laughter, changed after the wedding. The house that used to smell like fresh-baked pie and lavender turned quiet and cold. I was a reminder of a different life, one she seemed eager to forget. Not long after they married, I noticed how my place in the family started to shrink. At first, it was small things. I wasn't in the Christmas photo or my name was forgotten on the back-to-school list. But soon, it became clearer. One afternoon, she pulled me into the kitchen and said, Melissa, you're going to stay with Aunt June for a while, just until things settle down. Aunt June lived 3 states away, in a weathered farmhouse surrounded by wheat fields and dust. She welcomed me with open arms, but I knew it wasn't supposed to be permanent. My suitcase still had the airline tag when I realised no one planned for me to come back. I waited weeks for a call that never came, and eventually I stopped waiting. Aunt June and Uncle Harold had 2 kids of their own, and barely made ends meet with odd jobs and a worn-out pickup. I once heard her whispering at night that the money my mother had been sending had stopped. We can't keep doing this, she said through the paper-thin wall. We love her, but we're drowning. And still, she never let me see her worry. She bought me school supplies with coupons, kept dinner on the table, and always reminded me that I was loved, even if it wasn't by the woman who brought me into the world. The years passed. I worked through high school, stocked shelves at the local grocery store, and earned scholarships that took me to college in Denver. I became a veterinary technician, then studied further to become a vet. I loved animals more than people, mostly because animals never left. Eventually, I opened my own clinic with a former classmate. We turned it into something special, a place where folks felt safe bringing their pets. I met Dean during a flat tire on I-70 of all places. He was kind and didn't ask too many questions. We got married in a small ceremony with Aunt June by my side, holding a tissue in one hand and my arm in the other. I was 34 then, finally at peace with the past. Or so I thought. Now, at 42, I had built a life I could be proud of. Dean and I owned a modest home with a garden in the back and a porch swing out front. We had no kids, by choice, but we had 2 rescue dogs and a cat who thought he was a king. Then last Thursday, just before closing time at the clinic, my receptionist came to my office, brows knitted. There's a woman asking for you. She says it's family. That word hit harder than I expected. I walked into the lobby and saw her, Laurel, my half-sister. I hadn't seen her since she was a child, but I recognised her immediately. Same hazel eyes, same soft jawline as Mum. She looked worn down, her jacket too thin for February, her hands gripping her purse like it held her whole world. She gave me a hesitant smile. Hi, Melissa. Mum. She needs your help. I didn't speak. I just nodded and walked back into my office, letting the door close softly behind me. Later that night, after dinner, my phone rang. I knew the number before I answered. My mother's voice was weak, unfamiliar, but unmistakable. Melissa, she said quietly, we've hit some hard times. Cal's sick. I lost the house. We've been staying with friends, but it's not going to last. We need a place to go. We need you. I listened in silence. She talked about hospitals, overdue bills, foreclosure notices, but none of that touched me as much as the way she said, we need you, as if I had always been a part of we. Then she asked, can we stay with you? Just until we figure things out. I stood in the kitchen, staring at my wedding photo on the fridge. The guilt bubbled up fast, but so did the memory of every birthday she missed, every letter that was never written, every silence that screamed, I wasn't wanted, and I told her, "You never even called." She paused, then whispered, "I know." I didn't answer. I just let the line go quiet. The silence on the line stretched longer than I expected. I almost thought she hung up, but then I heard her take a slow, shaky breath. "I was scared you'd say no," she said softly, "and I deserved it. But I'm still your mother, Melissa." Those words should have meant something. Maybe they did once, but now they just felt like a key that no longer fit any door in my life. I didn't reply. I simply said, "I'll think about it," and hung up. Dean found me standing in the kitchen with the phone still in my hand, staring out the window like something out there could explain how I felt. He didn't ask questions. He just placed a warm hand on my shoulder and squeezed gently, like he was trying to anchor me in place. That's something I always loved about him. He never pushed when I wasn't ready. The next morning, I called Aunt June. She was in the middle of baking a pie and didn't seem surprised at all when I told her who had contacted me. "They always come back when they need something," she said matter-of-factly. "But where were they when you needed them?" I told her everything. Every word, every pause, every guilt-ridden whisper. And she listened the way she always had, like my voice mattered. When I was done, she didn't tell me what to do. She just said, "Honey, whatever you decide, just remember, helping someone doesn't mean letting them hurt you again." That sentence stayed with me all day. By the weekend, I'd received 5 more calls and 12 text messages. One was from Laurel, saying they were staying at a friend's garage apartment that had no heat. Another was from my youngest half-brother, a voice I'd never even heard before, calling me selfish for not helping our family. Then came the messages from strangers, friends of the family, apparently, telling me I should be ashamed for turning my back on blood. It was like watching people build a bridge to your house from a place you'd burned to the ground decades ago, then accusing you of being heartless for not lowering the drawbridge. Dean suggested we take a drive to clear our heads. We went up into the foothills outside Boulder, where the air still smelled like pine and snow. As we sat on a bench overlooking the valley, he finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. "What do you want to do?" I stared at the mountains for a long time before I answered. "I don't want them in my life, not again, not after everything." I felt the words settle in my chest like stones. "But I also don't want to be the kind of person who ignores someone in need." Dean nodded. "You don't have to invite them in to offer help. You're allowed to draw lines." So that night I called my mother again. This time, she answered on the first ring. "I've thought about what you said," I began, "and I'm sorry you're going through this. Truly. But I can't have you stay here. I won't open up my life to people who close the door on me." There was a pause, and then, "So you're just going to leave us out in the cold?" "No," I said firmly. "I've arranged to cover a month's rent for you at an extended stay motel in town. I'll have groceries delivered too. But that's it. After that, you'll have to figure it out on your own." She didn't say thank you. Instead, she let out a bitter little laugh. "All that success, and this is what you offer?" I smiled sadly, though she couldn't see it. "You didn't raise me. You don't get to shame me now." I ended the call before she could say another word. Later that night, I sat on the couch with Dean, watching our dogs doze by the fire. I felt hollow and free all at once, like a weighted mud had lifted, but it had left a mark. The next morning, I got a call from the motel. They confirmed the family had checked in. No thanks, no updates, just confirmation. That was fine. I didn't need gratitude. I just needed peace. But peace, I was learning, didn't come without cost. The motel call should have brought closure. I'd done what I believed was fair, offered help without opening the door wide enough to be hurt again. But instead of peace, I found myself drifting through the days with a quiet ache. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was more like walking through a familiar fog, one I hadn't felt in decades, a mixture of guilt, memory, and the uneasy feeling that I was being watched. The first sign came 3 days later. Dean and I returned from the grocery store to find a note taped to our front door. It wasn't threatening, just handwritten in shaky cursive, signed Mum. She said she was sorry for how things had turned out, that she missed me, that she'd do anything to start over. I crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash before Dean could even read it. I didn't reply. I didn't call. I told myself it was over. But the next morning, I saw Laurel in the clinic parking lot. She wasn't there for an appointment. She was just sitting in her car, engine off, eyes on the building like she was waiting. I didn't go out to her. I told my receptionist to call me only if it was an emergency, then shut the office door and sat in silence until the car finally drove away. The boundary I'd drawn felt like a chalk line in the rain. It got worse from there. A local pastor, someone I hadn't seen since childhood, came by the clinic with a letter from my mother. "She's hurting," he said, as if I didn't know that already. "She's ready to make amends." I took the envelope and, without opening it, dropped it in the donation box by the door. That evening, Dean found me in the backyard pulling weeds in the cold. I wasn't wearing gloves, and my fingers were raw from digging into the frozen soil. He didn't say anything, just took my hands in his and held them until they warmed again. "You're not doing anything wrong," he whispered. "You're just protecting yourself." I nodded, but it didn't stop the voice in my head. My mother's voice, quiet and needling, telling me I was cruel, that I was cold, that she was still my mother. I didn't know how to silence it. A week later, I got a call from the motel front desk again. "Ms. Carter," the clerk said, "I just wanted to let you know the family checked out 2 nights ago. They didn't say where they were going. We assumed you'd want to know." I thanked her, hung up, and just stood there in the hallway for a long time, not sure what I was feeling. Relief? Worry? A strange mix of both. That same day, I received a voicemail from Laurel. Her voice was tight and clipped. "I hope you're proud of yourself. She snapped. "They're sleeping in a borrowed camper now. You're selfish. You've always been selfish. You turned your back on your family." I deleted it without listening to the rest. That night, I pulled out an old photo album I hadn't opened in years. It was tucked away in a dusty cabinet, buried under old vet school notebooks and faded tax returns. Most of the photos were from my time with Aunt June, school plays, Halloween costumes, baking cookies on weekends. But in the very back was a single photo of my mother holding me as a baby. We looked happy. For a moment, I let myself imagine that picture had lasted, that somehow we'd never broken. Then I closed the album and pushed it back into the drawer. The next morning, I woke to find our mailbox stuffed with letters. Not from strangers, from my mother, all dated in the past 2 weeks. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. Whatever they said, they weren't for me now. They were for the girl I used to be. And that girl was long gone. I sat on the porch swing that afternoon, a blanket over my lap, the dogs curled up at my feet. Dean brought me tea, and we sat together without speaking. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and chimney smoke, and for a long moment I let myself feel the weight of it all. Not just the hurt, but the healing too. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I wasn't going back. It was a Thursday afternoon when I saw them again. I just finished a wellness check for a senior golden retriever named Daisy and was locking up the clinic early to prep for the weekend. As I walked to my car, I spotted the camper. It was parked halfway down the street, beat up and sun-faded, with a missing hubcap and a crooked license plate. Inside, I could make out silhouettes, 2 people moving slowly. I froze. It wasn't hard to guess who they were. They hadn't even left town. "Back home," I told Dean, and he didn't seem surprised. "Maybe they're hoping you'll come find them," he said. I shook my head, "or hoping I'll cave." That evening I baked. I hadn't baked in years, but something in me needed the rhythm. Measuring flour, cracking eggs, kneading dough like it could flatten out the tight knot in my chest. I made 2 loaves of banana bread the way Aunt June used to, then wrapped one in foil and tucked it into the freezer. The other I kept for us. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mail. No envelope this time. Just a folded sheet of notebook paper tucked under the welcome mat. My name was scrawled on the front. I recognized the handwriting instantly. It was from my mother. I know I can't undo the past, it began, but I'm asking you to look ahead. We're not asking for a mansion, just a roof, just time. I folded it back up and left it on the kitchen table. Dean saw it, but didn't touch it. He just looked at me. You okay? I shrugged. I think I'm getting there. That weekend, I drove out to the cemetery where Aunt June and Uncle Harold were buried. I brought flowers, sunflowers, her favourite, and sat by her headstone for a long time. The trees overhead had started to turn gold and red, their leaves falling gently onto the worn grey marble. I wish you were here, I said out loud. You tell me what to do without making it sound like advice. I sat there until the wind picked up, then kissed my fingertips and pressed them to the stone. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing the camper in my head and the faint outline of my mother's face behind the glass. Worn down, yes, but familiar. Still the same woman who once braided my hair, once sang to me when I was sick, long before everything went sideways. There were moments, before Cal, before the silence, when she really did love me. And I had to wonder, was it possible to hold both truths at once? That she had hurt me deeply, and yet, at one time, she loved me. By Monday, the camper was gone. I didn't ask where. I didn't look. I tried to focus on work, spaying kittens, checking senior labs, talking to worried pet owners, but something inside me had shifted, not in a soft, forgiving way, but in a grounded, anchored way. That afternoon, I sat down with Dean at the kitchen table and said, I think I need to write her back. Not to start anything again, just to close the door the right way. He nodded. If that's what you need, do it. So I wrote a letter. I told her that I heard her, that I saw her, that I understood she was trying in her own way, even if it came too late. I told her I'd chosen a different kind of family, one built on trust and presence. I told her I'd helped her once, and I didn't regret it, but I wouldn't be doing it again. And I told her, gently but clearly, that I forgave her, not for her sake, but for mine. I signed it simply, Melissa, then walked it out to the mailbox and let it go. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't make the pain disappear, but it felt like a stitch being pulled closed. Later that night, as the sun dipped behind the pines, Dean and I stood out on the porch with our dogs and watched the sky turn to watercolour. The quiet wrapped around us like an old quilt. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I owed anyone anything. And I finally slept. The letter was sent. No tracking number, no return address. I dropped it in the corner mailbox on Sycamore Street and walked away without looking back. It was strange, really, how simple that final act had been. Just paper and ink slipped into a blue metal box, and yet it carried years of weight. I didn't expect a reply. I didn't want one. The point wasn't to restart anything. It was to say goodbye out loud and on my own terms. A week passed, then another. Life went on. The air turned colder, and the trees along the main road shed their last leaves. I focused on work, attended a local adoption drive at the shelter, helped an elderly couple say goodbye to their 15-year-old Labrador. I was present again, not haunted, not pulled backward. Then, one afternoon as I was leaving the clinic, I noticed a package on the passenger seat of my car. It startled me. I looked around the parking lot, but no one was there. The package was small, wrapped in plain brown paper with no label. Just my name, written carefully in ink I recognised too well. Inside was a single photograph, a picture of me at 5 years old, sitting on my mother's lap. We were in the backyard of our old house, before Cow, before the silence. My mother was laughing, her eyes crinkled at the corners, arms wrapped around me tightly. Tucked behind the photo was a note. "I don't expect anything," it read, "but I wanted you to remember that once it was real. I'm sorry for forgetting how to hold on to that." There was no signature. She didn't need one. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the picture. It was the same one I'd seen years ago in that old photo album, but holding it in my hands now, delivered without demand, without plea, felt different. And I cried. Not out of sadness or anger, but because for the first time, it didn't hurt to remember. I didn't write her back. Instead, I put the photo in a wooden frame and set it on a shelf in my home office. Not as a tribute, but as a truth, something that had once been good, even if it hadn't lasted. Dean noticed it that evening and gave me a long, quiet look. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, surprising even myself. "I think I really am." The holidays came and went. We spent Thanksgiving with friends, shared stories over sweet potato pie, and took long walks with the dogs in the snow. There were no surprise visitors, no more letters, no more parked campers, just stillness, just home. Sometime in January, I got a call from the extended stay motel. A new clerk had found my number on an old record and called to ask if I'd be covering another stay for the Carter family. I told her no, kindly, firmly, and hung up the phone without guilt. Not long after, I sat down to update our will. Dean and I had talked about it before, but now I felt an urgency, not out of fear, but clarity. I wanted every part of my life to reflect the choices I'd made, the boundaries I'd drawn, the people I'd chosen. We left everything to each other, of course, and the rest to animal welfare nonprofits, Aunt June's hometown library, and a small trust for scholarships in her name. Family, I realised, wasn't about whose name was printed on your birth certificate. It was about who showed up, who stayed, who listened when it mattered most. And I'd been lucky to have that, even if it hadn't come from where I first expected. One night, as we sat on the porch, watching the stars peek through the pines, Dean reached for my hand. "You ever think about what would have happened if you'd said yes?" he asked. I nodded slowly. "Sometimes, but then I remember all the times I said yes to people who didn't deserve it." "And now?" "Now I say yes to myself." Dean smiled, gave my hand a squeeze, and we sat in that stillness, the kind that only comes after a storm. And this time I knew it would hold. In a world where connection is just a tap away, we're often reminded that not all ties deserve to stay bound. Melissa's story speaks to many of us, especially in 2025, when the pressure to reconcile with toxic family members can be overwhelming. Her journey reminds us that protecting your peace isn't selfish, it's self-respect. Boundaries are not walls, they're doors with locks, and you choose who holds the key. Forgiveness doesn't always require reunion. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and others is walk away from a cycle that no longer serves your well-being. If this story moved you, touched something deep inside, or made you reflect on your own boundaries, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to make a choice like Melissa's? Tell us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell so you won't miss our next story of strength, healing, and rediscovery. Thank you for being here with us.